We continue now at the top of Daf Chafam and Aleph in Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 20a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara said, if you have a situation of a shtar that is independently certified, and then two other witnesses come along and say that the witnesses who signed that shtar at the time of the signing, they were disqualified, so we do not believe the second witnesses. And the question is, why don't we at least say that it's 2 against 2? We should say it's a hachasha, and therefore we should not be able to collect with the shtar. And so Rav Sheshes answers that hachasha is tchilas hazama. When they're contradicting each other, that's the beginning of falsification. And there's a rule as follows. The rule is that you can't do hazama unless the witnesses are there in front of you. So too, when you're doing a hachasha, it has to be with the edim present. And in this case, these edim are not present. They're just signed on the document, and therefore it's not considered a hachasha. Rashi over here says, because the halacha is, when you're doing hazama, you're actually making the edim chayiv. There's a halacha that the edim, they're either going to get punished with malchus, or they're going to get kasher zama, kedei la'onshon, o nefesh, o mamon, they're going to either pay with their lives or with money. That's the halacha if you're testifying against somebody, so the person you're testifying against has to be there. So and so too, if you're just contradicting the edim, you're bringing mevatel their testimony, it has to be b'fneihem. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said to him, back to Rav Sheshes, Ilu have kamanu machishin lahu, have hachasha. Let's say they were in front of us and they had contradicted them, so it would be considered a contradiction. V'lo have meshkechinan buhu, and we wouldn't pay any attention to them, any attention to their testimony. To have a edus mocheshes, it would be considered contradicted testimony. So hashta the lesnu, now where they're not in front of us, the ilu have kaman, because had they been in front of us, dilma have a modelahu, maybe they didn't even admit that they were lying. So mehemnin, so now suddenly the fact that they're not there, they should suddenly be believed. Rashi over here says, Lo avim ashkichinan buhu, be'edei hashtar ligvos alpeim. If they were here in front of us, we would pay no attention to the witnesses of the shtar. We wouldn't allow you to collect with this shtar. So hashta di ikol ameimar ilu have kaman have modu. Here, where maybe they would be in front of us, maybe they would admit that they were lying. Lahani amrit mehemni. So then all of a sudden, in that case, you're going to say that they are believed, that we do collect with this shtar. So Rav Nachman therefore doesn't like Rav Sheshes' approach. Elamer Rav Nachman, rather Rav Nachman says, Uki trei lahade trei. You do say that it's 2 against 2. We say it's a contradiction in terms of testimony. V'uki mamona b'cheskas mari. And wherever the money is, that's where the money should stay. It should stay in the possession of the person who has the money. Rashi over here says, "V'uki mamona b'cheskas mari b'cheskas halove." So the borrower gets to keep the money. V'im karki tamud b'cheskas hamocher. And if we're disputing a sale, so the seller should keep the property. U'dikatani bebraisa einem monim. And when it says in the braisa that second set of witnesses who say that the witnesses signed on the shtar disqualified are not believed, lo delahav shtar ma'al yelamigvebe. It doesn't mean to say that this is a perfectly good shtar and you can collect with it. Ala delo karinale. It simply means that we don't tear up the shtar. V'itafis midi. And let's say the person would grab it away. Let's say over here, the malva would take his money from the lova. And the lova would come and say, I want my money back. We wouldn't take it out of the possession of the malva either. The point is, we're putting 2 against 2. Wherever the money is, that's where the money stays, according to Rav Nachman. And the Gemara continues, it's similar to the case of the property of Bar Shatia. Bar Shatia was an individual who sometimes he was a shota, sometimes he was an imbecile, but sometimes he would have moments of sanity. So the Bar Shatia zavin nichse, because Bar Shatia, he sold some property. Azu beitrei, and 2 people came and said, Amri, and they said, Keshu shota zavin, that the time that he sold the property, he was actually a shota, he was an imbecile. The Azu beitrei v'amri, and then 2 other people came and they said, no, Keshu cholim zavin, when he sold, he was actually sane, he was fine, and it's a good sale. Rashi over here says, again, he sold his property, and so you had a contradiction in witnesses. 2 witnesses said that the sale was good because he was healthy, and 2 said no, at the time that he sold, he was a shota. And so the Gemara says, Rav Ashi says, Uki trei lahade trei, you have to say that it's 2 against 2, V'uki mamona b'cheskas bar shatia, and therefore the money or the property in this case, it stays in the possession of bar shatia. And the Gemara says, "V'lo amran." We only say this, "Ela de'islei chazaka da'avase." It's only true if there's a chazaka from his father. Avolezlei chazaka da'avase. But if you don't have that chazaka, amrinon kishu shota zavan uchshu shota zavin. Then we say, in other words, if he purchased this property himself, it wasn't like an inheritance. So then we say, just like we're assuming that it was, let's say, sold when he was a shota, so we also have to assume that it was bought when he was a shota, and therefore he would not get that property. Rashi over here says, "V'lo amran du'uki nichse v'cheskas bar Barshati, we only say that Barshati gets the property. It already goes back to his father. It's an inheritance property. The Chazaka Mal Yossi, there we know he has a good Chazaka. But if he himself was the one that made the Chazaka, meaning he bought it, and that's how he made the Chazaka, so his purchase is just as good as a sale. Therefore, the original Chazaka, the purchase is not good enough because that wasn't a good Chazaka, so it doesn't undo the sale in such a situation. The Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Avo says, Ein mazimin es ha'edem ela b'fneihen. The halach is you can't falsify the witnesses unless they are present, unless it's in front of them. Umachijin es ha'edem, but you can contradict the witnesses shelo b'fneihen, even if it's not in their presence. V'hazama shelo b'fneihen, and when it comes to hazama, falsification not in front of them, nihida hazama lo have it, granted that it doesn't reach the level of hazama, hachasha miya have it, but it would be considered contradictory witnesses. That would be true. It would be considered a hachasha. Rashi over here says, nihida hazama lo have it leon sham, you're not going to punish them. Lo nefesh v'lo mammon, you can't take their lives, you can't take their money, but hachasha have it levatel edusam, but it is considered a contradiction in order to nullify their testimony. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, we said above, if there are edim that this was their signature, or let's say we have their signatures that have been on a different shtar, that there was a protest on that shtar, and that was certified in Bezdin. So in that case, so in that case we said they are not believed, since you have independent verification of the signatures, they are not believed to undo that testimony, to undo that shtar. And so the Gemara says, Kara olav ir in. It seems like this other shtar that we're using to certify, it has to be a shtar where there was some protest on that shtar and then it was certified. But lo Kara olav ir lo, but if there was never any protest on that original shtar that we're using to verify their signatures, then you can't use that shtar as verification. Rashi over here says, "Ein mekayim es hashtar mitoch shtar acher." You're not allowed to be mekayim a shtar from another shtar. Actually, we'll keep reading over here. The Gemara says, "Messiah leilu Rabbi Asi." This inference over here is a support of what Rabbi Asi said. The Amar Rabbi Asi, because Rabbi Asi says, "Ein mekayim es hashtar elam ishtar shekara olav irer v'hochzak bebezdin." When we take one shtar to certify another shtar, it can only be from a shtar where there was a protest and then it was certified in Bezdin. Again, back in Rashi over here, "Ein mekayim es hashtar mitoch shtar acher." That's what Rabbi Asi is saying. You cannot certify a shtar from another shtar, elimkin kara ira al oso shtar acher, unless there was some kind of protest on that other shtar. V'hochzak bebezdin al yidei edav, and then it was certified. The lo kara olav ira, because if there was no protest, chayshina dilmahu gufe mezuyefu. We have a suspicion over here. Maybe the first shtar that you're using as a verification, maybe that itself is a forgery. So you can't do it unless it was a shtar that was already, again, there was some kind of protest and it was certified in Bezdin. And the Gemara continues, Amri Nahardoi, they say in Nahardoi, Ein mekayim es hashtar ela mishtei ksubos o mishtei sados. We cannot certify a shtar unless you have verification of the signatures from two ksuba documents or from documents that are signed in terms of the purchase of two fields. That's only true if the owners used those documents of sale and they were able to stay on the property for 3 consecutive years without any protest. Rashi over here says, Mishtei sados me'idim ha'ila im chasumim al shnei shtaros acherim. If these witnesses were signed on 2 other documents, shehin mecher, which were sale documents, shtei sados, of 2 fields, v'acholim alakuchos al yedei shtaros halalu shalosh shanim, and the people who purchased these properties used these shtaros and have been on the property for 3 years, mekayim shtar shlishi mehen, then you can say that we're going to use those documents to certify a 3rd shtar from them, imachasimos domos, if the signatures are similar. Beshuvi means below ear. They were there again 3 consecutive years and there was no protest. The Gemara continues, Amar Rav Shimi Barashi says, Uviyotze mitachas yad acher. This is only true if these shtaros are in the possession of somebody else. Aval miyad atzmo, but if it's the same person that has those shtaros, you're trying to verify his shtar with other shtaros that he has, lo, so then no, that would not be good. Rashi over here says, somebody else has these stars that you're using to verify this guy's star. We're not using a star that this same guy happens to have. That you can't use. And the Gemara says, what's the difference that if it's in his possession, it's no good? Because we're afraid maybe what happened was he just forged it. As Rashi says, he looked at the handwriting on those shtaros. And he used that in order to do the third signature on the signature on the third document. Dugmas osa chasima. He was able to copy the chasima. So if you're worried about that, so mitachas yidei acharnami, even if you have the shtaros in somebody else's possession, dil ma'azal v'chaza asav zayif. Maybe he went to that other person who had the shtaros and he looked at those shtaros and he used that in order to forge the signatures. And to that the Gemara says, Kuli hai lo matzi mechav, and that a person is not able to do. If a person has the documents in his possession, it's easy to look at them, take your time, and forge a new document. But if it's in somebody else's possession, to go over there and in that fashion be able to forge a new document, that's going to be very difficult to do. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Kosev Adam Eduso al Ashtar. A person is allowed to write his own testimony on a shtar in a document, and then use that writing to remember the edus and testify about it many years later. Rashi says, Kosev Adam Maso Eid Bedavar. Let's say a person is made a witness on something. V'yare l'shocha. He's afraid that he might forget it when he's called upon to testify. Kozval chatichas klaf u'matzniya. He can write it down on a piece of paper, store it away, hide it away, and then come back many years later. Umeid al pioso ksav afilu lachar kama shanim. He can testify using that writing, using that document that he wrote, even many years later. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna, but Rav Huna says, V'hu shezochra me'atzmo. It's only true if he really remembers the incident on his own. It can't be that he's just reading it straight off the document. Rashi says, shezochra me'atzmo v'lo re'yes hashtar nizkar k'tzas me'eduso me'elav. Without looking at the shtar, he remembers a little of the testimony. He just needs the shtar to come up with some details. Rav Yochanan, Amar Rav Yochanan says, Afa b'shein zochra me'atzmo. No, even though he doesn't remember it on its own. As Rashi says, Afa b'shein zochra me'atzmo ela la'achar shera b'shtar. What it means is, even according to Rav Yochanan, after he looks at the shtar, Nasan Balibo v'nizkar, he thinks and he pays attention and he remembers. He hasn't forgotten it so much to the point where if you remind him of it, he won't remember. No, if you remind him of it, he's able to remember. However, Rashi does point out, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, if a person has no recollection whatsoever, even after reading the document, then you certainly cannot testify. The pasuk says you have to testify verbally, but not from writing. And so therefore everybody is going to agree to that. It's just a question of how much do you have to remember. According to Rashi, Rabbi Yochanan says that if by looking at it he remembers, that's enough. Rav Huna says no, there has to be part of it that he remembers even without looking at the writing. The Gemara continues, Amar Rabba, some change it to Rava. Amar Rava says, Shema minami Rabbi Yochanan, we see from Rabbi Yochanan, Hani beitrei de yodi sa'adusa. Let's say you have two people, they know a certain testimony. Umanshi chad minayu, and then one of them happens to forget. So midchar chad l'chavre, one is able to remind the other, as long as the other one did not totally forget, but he's being reminded, and then when he's reminded, he remembers, that is okay, and he can testify. And the Gemara continues, they ask the following question, Atzmomai, what if the Baal Din himself reminds the witnesses? Rashi says, Atzmomai and Baal Din Atzmomai, Askiru Achan Izkormai. Let's say the person who's, owed the money, he reminds the witnesses, and in that fashion they remembered, is that going to be okay? Rav Chaviva Amar Afilo Atzmo. Rav Chaviva says even that's okay. Even the Baal Din is allowed to remind the witnesses. Mar Brei de Rav Ashi Amar Atzmo Lo. Mar Brei de Rav Ashi says no. The Baal Din cannot do that. V'hilchasan the halacha is Atzmo Lo. The Baal Din is not allowed to remind the witnesses, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amud Beis.